Her millionaire husband thought he could sneak away with his maid of honor to
Good
his
morning,
beach
darling.
house.
We've been
expecting
But
you.
what he didn't know
Indeed.
was that she was already inside waiting, not alone, but with the maid's husband. Tonight, secrets will unravel, hearts will break, and the truth will change everything. A great story, full of heartwarming love, deep emotions, and passionate romance, with a truly unforgettable ending. This story is a little long, but don't skip a single part, I promise. It will be the best story of your life. I worked very hard writing this story just for you. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Lord bless you with endless peace, fill your hearts with joy, and guide your steps with His light. May every moment of your life shine with love and hope. Amen. If you are here, write present. If you feel this bond, write I am with Mr. Peter. My family, these stories are my heart and soul, shared with love and sacrifice just for you. Leaving before the end breaks me. It feels as if my effort and love are unseen. Please stay till the last word. Every moment is made for you. And to my new family, if you doubt me, ask my old family. They will tell you of my loyalty, truth, and endless love. Their faith is my proof. Your support is my greatest blessing. Together, we are one strong, unbreakable family under God's love. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click, every comment keeps this beautiful family alive. The moment Morgan Bruce saw her, he knew his bachelor empire was about to crumble. The mahogany doors of the executive boardroom swung open, and every conversation died. 32 of the most powerful men in New York turned their heads like synchronized swimmers. But Morgan Bruce, billionaire CEO of Bruce Enterprises, felt his world tilt on its axis. The woman who strode into his sanctuary wasn't just beautiful, she was a force of nature wrapped in a tailored black Armani suit that hugged curves that could stop traffic on Wall Street. Candy Simone commanded the room before she even spoke a word. Her stilettos clicked against the Italian marble floor with the precision of a metronome, each step announcing that someone extraordinary had arrived. Morgan gripped his Mont Blanc pen so tightly his knuckles turned white, watching as she set her leather briefcase on the conference table with the confidence of a woman who'd never heard the word no and wouldn't recognize it if she did. Gentlemen, her voice was silk, wrapped around steel, each syllable perfectly enunciated with just a hint of southern warmth that made Morgan's pulse quicken. I'm here to tell you why your company is hemorrhaging $50 million a year, and more importantly, how I'm going to stop it. The room erupted in indignant murmurs. These were men who'd built empires, crushed competitors, and made fortunes that could fund small countries. They didn't appreciate being lectured by anyone, especially not by a woman who looked like she should be gracing magazine covers instead of boardrooms. But Morgan Bruce wasn't like other men. He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow smile spreading across his face as he watched Candy silence the room with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a look that could freeze hellfire. This wasn't just any consultant. This was a corporate assassin, and she was about to perform surgery on his company with the precision of a neurosurgeon. Your quarterly reports show a pattern, Candy continued, her fingers dancing across her tablet as she pulled up holographic projections that filled the air above the conference table. You're playing it safe, conservative investments, traditional strategies, and the kind of thinking that made you successful 20 years ago. She paused, her dark eyes scanning the room until they locked with Morgan's. For a moment that felt like eternity. The world narrowed to just the two of them. Her gaze was intelligent, fierce, and challenging, like she was daring him to prove he was worthy of her attention. The problem with playing it safe, she said, never breaking eye contact with Morgan, is that safety is the most dangerous position in today's market. Morgan felt something shift inside his chest. He'd dated supermodels and socialites, women who were beautiful but empty, who saw him as a walking bank account rather than a man. But this woman, this magnificent, brilliant creature, was looking at him like she could see straight through to his soul and found it wanting. Ms. Simone, interrupted Harold Worthington, the eldest board member, and Morgan's most vocal critic. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, Bruce Enterprises has been profitable for 30 consecutive years using these same strategies. Candy turned to Harold with a smile that could have powered the city grid. Mr. Worthington, profitability and optimization are two very different things. You've been profitable, yes, but you've also left approximately $200 million on the table over the past 5 years. The number hit the room like a physical blow. $200 million. Morgan felt his heart rate spike as Candy continued her presentation, systematically dismantling every assumption his board had made about their business model. She moved like a dancer, graceful and purposeful, her hands painting pictures in the air as she explained complex financial instruments and market strategies that most Harvard MBAs would struggle to understand. But it wasn't just her intelligence that captivated Morgan. It was the passion in her voice, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about turning companies around, the fire that burned behind her professional exterior. Your technology division alone could be worth 3 times its current valuation with the right partnerships, Candy explained, pulling up comparative analysis charts that made Morgan's head spin. Your real estate holdings are underutilized, your international expansion has been timid at best, and don't get me started on your social media strategy. She paused at the head of the table directly across from Morgan and placed both hands flat on the mahogany surface. The gesture was simple, but it transformed her from presenter to predator, a corporate shark who'd smelled blood in the water. I can increase your profit margins by 40% within 18 months, she said, her voice dropping to barely above a W whisper. But it requires vision, courage, and the willingness to stop thinking like your grandfather's company and start thinking like the empire you could become. The room was dead silent. Morgan could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he stared at this incredible woman who'd just promised to make him richer than his wildest dreams. But money wasn't what had his attention anymore. It was the way she moved her hands when she talked, graceful and expressive like a conductor directing an orchestra. It was the tiny beauty mark just above her left eyebrow that made her face even more captivating. It was the confidence that radiated from her like heat from a flame, the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes, and the way she'd challenged every man in the room without breaking a sweat. I don't even know her, Morgan whispered to himself, not realizing he'd spoken aloud until James Patterson, his business partner and closest friend, leaned over with a knowing smirk. You look like you're in love already, Morgan, James murmured, his voice barely audible. Morgan didn't deny it. He couldn't. This woman, this brilliant, gorgeous, formidable woman, had walked into his life 30 minutes ago and turned everything he thought he knew about himself upside down. Candy finished her presentation with a flourish, shutting down her holographic displays and returning her tablet to her briefcase with movements so smooth they looked choreographed. The board members began talking all at once, their voices overlapping in excitement and concern as they discussed the implications of her proposals. But Morgan only had eyes for her. She gathered her materials with the same precision she'd used throughout her presentation, every movement economical and purposeful. When she looked up and caught him staring, she didn't look away or blush like so many women did. Instead, she held his gaze with a slight smile that suggested she knew exactly what effect she was having on him. Gentlemen, she said, addressing the room but keeping her eyes on Morgan, I'll give you 48 hours to decide. My time is valuable, and I have 3 other Fortune 500 companies who would kill for this opportunity. She moved toward the door, and Morgan felt panic rise in his throat. She was leaving. This incredible woman was about to walk out of his life, and he had no idea if he'd ever see her again. Ms. Simone, he called out, his voice carrying more desperation than he'd intended. She paused at the door, turning back with one eyebrow raised in question. "Yes, Mr. Bruce." "I dot." Morgan stood up, suddenly aware that every eye in the room was on him. "I'd like to discuss your proposal further. Privately." Her smile was enigmatic, revealing nothing and everything at the same time. "I'm sure you would, Mr. Bruce, but business discussions happen during business hours, and my calendar is quite full." With that, she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the lingering echo of her confidence. Morgan sank back into his chair, feeling like he'd just been hit by a beautiful tornado. The board members were talking excitedly about profit margins and market strategies, but Morgan barely heard them. All he could think about was the way Candy had looked at him, like she was seeing something in him that he didn't even know existed. For the first time in his 35 years, Morgan Bruce, a man who'd built a billion-dollar empire through sheer determination and ruthless business acumen, felt completely and utterly out of his depth. And he'd never been more excited about anything in his entire life. That night, alone in his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, Morgan stared out at the city lights and made a decision that would change everything. He was going to pursue Candy Simone with the same relentless determination he'd used to build his empire. He had no idea that the most important conquest of his life was about to begin. Chapter 2. The Relentless Pursuit. Morgan Bruce had conquered Wall Street, but one woman was about to bring him to his knees. 3 days had passed since Candy Simone had walked out of his boardroom, and Morgan felt like a man dying of thirst in a desert made of spreadsheets and quarterly reports. He'd tried to focus on business, attempted to review the merger proposals stacked on his mahogany desk, but every few minutes his mind would drift back to the way she'd commanded his boardroom like a queen addressing her subjects. The intercom buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. "Mr. Bruce." His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "Ms. Simone is here for the contract signing." Morgan's heart slammed against his ribs like a caged animal. She'd accepted his offer, not just the consulting contract, but the partnership deal he'd spent 3 sleepless nights crafting. It was the most generous contract his legal team had ever seen, worth $10 million over 2 years, with profit sharing that could make her richer than most CEOs. But money wasn't why he'd written it. The mahogany doors opened, and Candy glided in, wearing a burgundy silk dress that hugged her curves like liquid fire. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon that showcased the elegant line of her neck, and Morgan had to grip his desk to keep from crossing the room and pulling her into his arms. "Mr. Bruce," she said, her voice as smooth as aged whiskey, "I have to admit, your offer was unexpected." She moved to the leather chair across from his desk, crossing her legs in a way that made Morgan forget how to breathe. The burgundy dress rode up slightly, revealing just enough thigh to make his mouth go dry. "I believe in investing in exceptional talent," Morgan managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. Candy's smile was knowing, like she could read every thought racing through his mind. "Is that what this is? An investment in talent?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Morgan's pulse quicken. She knew. Somehow this brilliant woman had seen right through his business facade to the hunger burning beneath. "Among other things," he admitted, standing and walking around his desk until he was close enough to catch the intoxicating scent of her perfume. For the next hour, they discussed contract details, but Morgan barely heard the words. He was mesmerized by the way she spoke, the intelligence that sparkled in her dark eyes, the graceful gestures of her hands as she explained her vision for his company. She wasn't just beautiful. She was magnificent, a force of nature disguised as a woman. When the contracts were signed and the lawyers had left, Morgan found himself alone with the woman who'd been haunting his dreams. "Ms. Simone," he began, then stopped. "May I call you Candy?" "That depends," she replied, tilting her head in a way that made his heart stutter. What you plan to do with the privilege." The words were innocent enough, but the way she said them, with that slight smile and those knowing eyes, made Morgan feel like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown territory. "Have dinner with me," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Tonight." Candy stood, smoothing down her dress with movements so fluid they looked like art. "I'm busy tonight, Mr. Bruce. I have 3 companies to save, and 1 empire to build." She moved toward the door, and Morgan felt desperation claw at his throat. "Tomorrow then, or the day after. Name your price. I'll clear my schedule for a month if that's what it takes." At the door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Mr. Bruce, I don't think you understand. I'm not a woman who can be bought with dinner reservations and expensive wine." "Then what would it take?" Morgan asked, his voice raw with need. Her smile was enigmatic, revealing nothing and everything at the same time. "Surprise me." And then she was gone, leaving Morgan alone with the echo of her challenge and the lingering scent of her perfume. 2 weeks later, Morgan made his first move. The elevator to Candy's penthouse office climbed 42 floors, giving Morgan plenty of time to question his sanity. In his arms, he carried a crystal vase containing 1,000 white roses, not red, because red was predictable, and Candy Simone was anything but predictable. Each rose had been hand-selected from the most exclusive florist in Manhattan, and tucked among the petals were handwritten notes, each one containing a reason why she should give him a chance. It had taken him 3 days to write them all, and his hand was cramped from the effort. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that screamed success. Glass walls, modern art, and a view of Central Park that probably cost more per month than most people made in a year. But Morgan only had eyes for the woman behind the receptionist's desk. "I'm here to see Ms. Simone," he announced, struggling slightly with the massive arrangement. The receptionist's eyes widened. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Bruce?" "Morgan Bruce. And no, I don't have an appointment. But I have roses." The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. Morgan Bruce, who'd never chased a woman in his life, was standing in a lobby holding enough flowers to stock a wedding. "Mr. Bruce." Candy's voice came from behind him, and he turned to see her emerging from her office, looking absolutely stunning in a navy blue power suit that made his knees weak. "I wanted to surprise you," Morgan said, feeling suddenly foolish as several of her employees gathered to watch the spectacle. Candy approached slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. When she reached him, she plucked one of the roses from the arrangement and brought it to her nose, closing her eyes as she inhaled its fragrance. 1,000 roses, she observed, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "That's either very romantic or very desperate." "Can't it be both?" Morgan asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a moment, she just looked at him, and Morgan felt like she was seeing straight through to his soul. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. Not the polite, professional smile she'd given him before, but something warmer, more genuine. "I'm impressed, Mr. Bruce," she said, loud enough for her employees to hear. "But I'm also very busy closing a deal that could net my client $50 million. Morgan's heart sank, but before he could respond, she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "But perhaps we could discuss your consulting needs over coffee tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp." She turned and walked back toward her office, leaving Morgan standing there with his roses and a smile that felt like it might crack his face in half. "Sir," the receptionist asked hesitantly, "what would you like us to do with the flowers?" Morgan looked at the massive arrangement, then back at Candy's retreating form. "Keep them," he said. "Consider them a preview." The coffee meeting was a disaster. The second proposal was worse. Morgan had arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, only to find a note from Candy's assistant explaining that she'd been called away on an emergency, a hostile takeover attempt at one of her client companies that required her immediate attention. He'd waited anyway for 3 hours until her assistant had finally convinced him that Candy wouldn't be returning that day. The second attempt came a week later when Morgan appeared at her office with a proposal that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fact that he couldn't get her out of his head. "I want to ask you something important," he'd begun, but Candy had cut him off with a laugh that sounded like music. "Mr. Bruce," she'd said, "you're a brilliant businessman, but your timing is terrible. I'm in the middle of negotiations that could change the entire tech industry." She'd been kind but firm, and Morgan had left feeling like he was trying to catch lightning in a bottle with his bare hands. But Morgan Bruce hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by giving up easily. The third attempt happened at midnight, and it changed everything. Candy's office building was supposed to be empty at this hour, but Morgan had learned that she often worked late when she was closing major deals. The security guard recognized him. His company owned a significant stake in the building and let him up without question. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like it took forever. Morgan's palms were sweating, his heart was racing, and he was carrying a briefcase that contained the most important proposal of his life. The lights were on in Candy's office, and through the glass walls he could see her silhouetted against the city skyline. She was standing with her back to the door, talking on the phone in rapid-fire Spanish, her free hand gesturing emphatically as she negotiated what sounded like a complex international deal. Morgan knocked softly on the glass door and she turned, her eyebrows rising in surprise when she saw him. She held up one finger, indicating he should wait, and continued her conversation for another 5 minutes before finally hanging up. "Mr. Bruce," she said, opening the door, "it's midnight. Either you're having a breakdown or this is about to get very interesting." "I can't hide this anymore," Morgan said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I can't pretend this is about business or consulting or profit margins. I love you." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Candy's expression didn't change, but Morgan saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "You love me," she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Morgan said, stepping into her office and setting his briefcase on her desk. "I know you're brilliant. I know you're driven. I know you see the world differently than anyone I've ever met, and I know that every day since you walked into my boardroom, I've felt like I was sleepwalking through my life, until you woke me up." Candy moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights spread below them. "And what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Bruce?" Morgan opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. "A merger," he said. "Not between our companies, between us." She turned, one eyebrow raised in question. "I'm proposing marriage, Candy. I'm proposing that you don't just save my company, that you help me build an empire, that we do it together, as equals, as partners in everything." He pulled out the contracts he'd spent weeks preparing. 50-50 ownership of everything I have. Joint decision-making power, your name on the building. Not because you're my wife, but because you're the most brilliant business mind I've ever encountered, and I want you by my side when I conquer the world. Candy took the contracts, her eyes scanning the pages with the speed and precision of a legal expert. Morgan watched her face, trying to read her expression, but she was giving nothing away. "This is," she began, then stopped, looking up at him with something like wonder in her eyes. "This is the most ridiculous thing anyone has ever offered me." Morgan's heart sank. "I understand if it's too much, too fast." "Ridiculous," she continued, "because it's exactly what I would have proposed myself." She set the contracts down and moved toward him, closing the distance between them until she was close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. "Mr. Bruce," she said, her voice soft but firm, "if you're going to propose to me, you're going to do it properly." Morgan dropped to one knee so fast he nearly toppled over. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a ring box that contained a 10-carat diamond surrounded by emeralds, not because it was expensive, but because the emeralds matched her eyes. "Candy Simone," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you help me build an empire that makes everything we've accomplished so far look like practice? Will you be my partner, my equal, my queen?" Candy looked down at him for a long moment, and Morgan felt like his entire future hung in the balance. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, the most beautiful sight he'd ever seen. "Yes," she said simply, "but only because you finally learned how to surprise me." As Morgan slipped the ring onto her finger, he knew his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. He was no longer just a billionaire CEO. He was about to become half of the most powerful couple in the world. Chapter 3. Wedding Night. Fire and Passion. 6 months later, Manhattan held its breath as two empires became one. The Cathedral of St. John the Divine had witnessed many grand weddings, but nothing compared to the union of Morgan Bruce and Candy Simone. 500 of the most powerful people in the world filled the Gothic arches, while outside, 1,000 photographers fought for the perfect shot of what the media had dubbed the wedding of the century. Candy stood at the massive oak doors, her hand resting on her father's arm, wearing a custom Vera Wang gown that had taken 4 months to create. The dress was a masterpiece of silk and diamonds, with a train that stretched 20 feet behind her, but it was her radiance that took everyone's breath away. She looked like a queen preparing to claim her throne. "You ready for this, baby girl?" her father whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Candy squeezed his arm, her eyes fixed on the altar where Morgan waited in a tuxedo that had been tailored to perfection. Even from this distance, she could see the love and desire burning in his eyes, and she felt an answering fire kindle in her chest. "I've been ready my whole life, Daddy," she whispered back. The doors opened, and Wagner's bridal chorus filled the cathedral as Candy began her walk down the aisle, but she only had eyes for Morgan, who looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe as he watched her approach. Every step brought her closer to the man who'd turned her carefully ordered world upside down. 6 months ago, she'd been a successful consultant with a business to run and goals to achieve. Now she was about to become half of the most powerful couple in New York, and the thought both thrilled and terrified her. Morgan's best man, James Patterson, leaned over and whispered, "Breathe, man. You look like you're about to pass out." But Morgan couldn't breathe. Watching Candy walk toward him was like watching a goddess descend from Mount Olympus. The diamonds in her dress caught the light from the stained glass windows, making her glow like she was made of starlight. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style that showcased the elegant line of her neck, and the smile on her face was radiant enough to power the entire city. When she finally reached the altar, her father placed her hand in Morgan's, and the simple touch sent electricity racing through both their bodies. "Take care of my daughter," her father said, his voice carrying the weight of a father's love and the subtle threat of a man who'd built his own fortune from nothing. "With my life," Morgan promised, and he meant it. The ceremony was a blur of vows and rings, of promises made before God and 500 witnesses. But when the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, and Morgan lifted Candy's veil to claim his first kiss as her husband, the rest of the world faded away. The kiss was soft at first, almost reverent, but then Candy's hands fisted in Morgan's lapels and pulled him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made the congregation collectively hold their breath. It was a kiss that spoke of promises yet to be kept, of passion that had been building for months, of two people who'd found their perfect match in each other. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Morgan's eyes held a heat that made Candy's knees weak. "Hello, Mrs. Bruce," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Hello, husband," she whispered back, and the word sent a thrill through both of them. The reception was legendary, but it was only a prelude to what came after. The Rainbow Room had been transformed into a wonderland of roses and crystal, with a view of Manhattan that made everyone feel like they were dining among the stars. The food was exquisite, the champagne flowed like water, and the dancing went on until nearly midnight. But Morgan and Candy barely noticed any of it. They moved through the evening like actors playing a role, accepting congratulations and posing for photos, but their minds were already racing ahead to what came next. Finally, as the last guest departed and the photographers packed away their equipment, Morgan swept Candy into his arms and carried her to the elevator that would take them to the penthouse suite he'd reserved for their wedding night. "Are you kidnapping me, Mr. Bruce?" Candy asked. Her arms wound around his neck as he carried her effortlessly. "Just claiming what's mine, Mrs. Bruce," Morgan replied, his voice low and full of promise. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like it took forever. They were alone for the first time all day, and the tension that had been building between them for months was now crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. When the doors opened to reveal the penthouse suite, Candy gasped. The entire space was filled with candles and white roses, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of Manhattan sparkled like diamonds against black velvet. Morgan carried her across the threshold and set her down gently in the center of the room, but he didn't step back. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the high line of her cheekbones. "I can't believe you're mine," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "I can't believe I waited so long to let you catch me," Candy replied, her hands coming up to cover his. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, both of them aware that they were on the threshold of something that would change everything. They'd been building toward this moment for months, stolen kisses in boardrooms, heated glances across dinner tables, the constant tension of two people who wanted each other desperately but had been waiting for the right moment. That moment was now. Morgan's hands moved to the intricate buttons that ran down the back of Candy's wedding dress, his fingers working with surprising skill, despite the way they trembled slightly. "Are you nervous?" Candy asked, her own voice breathless as she felt the dress begin to loosen. "Terrified," Morgan admitted, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "I've wanted you for so long, I'm afraid I'll disappoint you." Candy's laugh was soft and full of love. "Morgan Bruce, you've never disappointed me in anything. Why would you start now?" The dress fell away like water, pooling at Candy's feet in a cascade of silk and diamonds. Underneath, she wore lingerie that had been custom-made for this night. Ivory silk and French lace that made Morgan's mouth go dry. "My God," he breathed, his eyes drinking in every curve, every perfect line of her body. "You're so beautiful it hurts to look at you." Candy's hands moved to his bow tie, untying it with movements that were both graceful and urgent. "Then stop looking," she whispered, "and start touching." That was all the invitation Morgan needed. His mouth crashed down on hers in a kiss that was hungry and desperate, months of wanting finally finding release. His hands roamed her body like he was trying to memorize every inch of her skin, and Candy responded with equal fervor, her nails raking down his back as she tried to pull him closer. They moved together toward the massive bed that dominated one wall of the suite, leaving a trail of discarded clothes in their wake. Morgan's tuxedo jacket hit the floor, followed by his shirt, and Candy's hands explored the hard planes of his chest with reverent touches that made him groan. When they finally fell onto the bed together, both were breathing hard, their bodies pressed together, skin to skin for the first time. Morgan propped himself up on his elbows, looking down at his wife with an expression of such love and desire that Candy felt tears prick at her eyes. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've loved you since the moment you walked into my boardroom and turned my world upside down." "I love you too," Candy replied, her hands framing his face. "I fought it for months because I was scared of losing control, but you make me want to lose control." "Then let go," Morgan whispered, pressing soft kisses along the column of her throat. "Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." What followed was a dance as old as time, but as new as their love for each other. Morgan worshipped Candy's body with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, his hands and mouth exploring every curve, every sensitive spot, until she was trembling with need. When she reached for him, her own hands eager to explore and please, Morgan had to close his eyes against the overwhelming sensation of finally being touched by the woman he'd dreamed about for months. "I want you," Candy whispered against his ear, her voice husky with desire. "I want all of you." "Are you sure?" Morgan asked, even though his body was screaming for her. "Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be mine completely." Candy's smile was radiant and full of mischief. "Morgan Bruce, I've been yours since you got down on one knee in my office. Now stop talking and make love to your wife." When they finally came together, it was with a passion that shook them both to their cores. Years of wanting, months of building tension, all released in a crescendo of sensation that left them both gasping and clinging to each other like they were drowning in pleasure. Morgan moved with careful control at first, mindful that this was their first time together, but Candy's urgent whispers and demanding touches soon had him losing himself in the rhythm of their bodies moving together. She met him thrust for thrust, her nails digging into his shoulders as waves of sensation crashed over her. "Look at me," Morgan commanded, his voice strained with the effort of holding back. "I want to see your face when you fall apart for me." Candy's eyes locked with his, and what she saw there, love, desire, and complete devotion, sent her spiraling over the edge with a cry of his name that seemed to echo off the windows. Morgan followed her over, his own release triggered by the sight of his wife coming apart in his arms, and for a moment that felt like eternity, they were lost in each other completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the silk sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, their hearts slowly returning to normal rhythm. Morgan traced lazy patterns on Candy's bare shoulder, marveling at the fact that she was finally, truly his. "Was it worth the wait?" Candy asked, her voice sleepy and satisfied as she curled against his side. Morgan tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It was worth everything," he said. "You're worth everything." Outside their windows, Manhattan continued its restless existence, but inside their penthouse suite, two people who'd found their perfect match in each other finally slept, secure in the knowledge that they'd found something most people only dreamed of: true love, wrapped in passion and sealed with promises that would last a lifetime. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Morgan and Candy woke in each other's arms, ready to begin their new life as husband and wife, as partners in love and business, as two people who'd conquered the world and found it was nothing compared to conquering each other's hearts. Their honeymoon would take them to a private island in the Caribbean, but the real journey was just beginning. Together, they would build an empire that would make their individual successes look like practice runs. But first, they had 14 more hours in this penthouse suite, and Morgan intended to spend every minute of it showing his wife exactly how much he loved her. The world could wait. Their empire could wait. This moment, this perfect, passionate, love-filled moment, was theirs alone. Chapter 4. 3 years of power. Couple bliss. 3 years later, Morgan and Candy Bruce weren't just married. They were a force of nature that had reshaped the business world. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse bedroom, casting golden light across the Egyptian cotton sheets where Kandi lay sleeping, her dark hair spread across the pillow like silk. Morgan stood at the window, already dressed in his custom Tom Ford suit, but he couldn't bring himself to leave for the office. Not yet. Not when his wife looked like a goddess who'd decided to grace his bed with her presence. "Are you watching me sleep again?" Kandi's voice was husky with sleep, and she didn't open her eyes, but Morgan could see the smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Guilty," Morgan admitted, moving back to the bed and sitting on the edge. "I was thinking about the Forbes cover." Kandi's eyes opened, immediately alert despite having been asleep moments before. It was one of the things he loved about her, that sharp intelligence that was always just beneath the surface, ready to engage with whatever challenge the day might bring. "Which one?" she asked, stretching like a cat in a way that made Morgan's mouth go dry despite 3 years of marriage. "We've been on 17 covers together." "The one where they called us the Emperor and Empress of American business," Morgan said, his hand finding hers automatically. "I keep thinking about how far we've come." And they had come far. In 3 years, they'd transformed Bruce Enterprises from a successful company into a global empire worth $500 million. Kandi hadn't just saved his business. She'd revolutionized it, turning it into a diversified powerhouse that dominated everything from technology to real estate to entertainment. Their names were spoken in the same breath as the great power couples of history. Magazine covers fought for their attention. Harvard Business School had created an entire case study around their partnership. They were invited to every important event, consulted by world leaders, and feared by their competitors. But more than that, they were happy. "Come back to bed," Kandi murmured, pulling on his hand. "The empire can wait another hour." "We have the board meeting at 9, Morgan protested, but he was already loosening his tie. "We own the board," Kandi laughed, sitting up and letting the sheet fall away from her body in a way that made Morgan forget every appointment on his calendar. "They'll wait." Morgan was out of his suit and back in bed before Kandi could finish laughing, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted like morning coffee and the kind of contentment he'd never imagined possible. "I love you, Mrs. Bruce," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Bruce," she replied, and even after 3 years, those words still sent electricity racing through his veins. 2 hours later, they walked into the Bruce Enterprises boardroom like conquering heroes returning from a successful campaign. The 20-story glass tower that housed their headquarters was a monument to their success, with their names etched in gold letters above the entrance. Inside, every detail spoke of power and sophistication, from the Italian marble floors to the original Picassos that hung in the lobby. But it was the boardroom on the top floor that truly showcased what they'd built together. The massive mahogany table could seat 30 people, but today it was just the core team, the brilliant minds that Morgan and Kandi had assembled to help them dominate industry after industry. "Good morning, everyone," Kandi said as she took her seat at the head of the table opposite Morgan. "Let's talk about conquering Europe." The next 3 hours were a masterclass in strategic thinking and flawless execution. Morgan and Kandi moved through the meeting like dancers who'd been performing together for decades, finishing each other's sentences, building on each other's ideas, presenting a united front that was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. They discussed the acquisition of a German manufacturing company, the launch of their new tech division in London, and the real estate developments that would transform the skylines of 3 major cities. Numbers that would make most people dizzy were thrown around like casual conversation. "The London project alone will net us $50 million in the first year," James Patterson, now their chief operating officer, reported. "And that's conservative." "Make it 75, Candy said, not even looking up from her tablet. "We're not in the business of conservative anymore." Morgan watched his wife command the room with the same mixture of awe and desire that had first captured him in this very boardroom 3 years ago. She'd become even more magnificent with time and success, her confidence now absolute, her beauty enhanced by the knowledge that she was one of the most powerful women in the world. After the meeting, they had lunch at Le Bernardin, where the maitre d' greeted them by name and led them to their usual table, the one with the best view and the most privacy. They were photographed walking in, of course, because everything they did was news, but they'd long since stopped noticing the paparazzi. "The Wall Street Journal wants to do another profile," Morgan mentioned as they waited for their appetizers. "Something about how we've changed the definition of a power couple." Candy smiled, the expression both amused and slightly predatory. "What's the angle?" "How two people fell in love and accidentally took over the world." "Close," Morgan laughed. "More like the couple that conquered capitalism and made it look easy." "I like that better," Candy said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Though we both know it wasn't easy." Morgan laced their fingers together, marveling as he always did at how perfectly her hand fit in his. The best things never are. They ate in comfortable conversation, discussing everything from the new art installation they were considering for the lobby to the charity gala they were hosting next month. To anyone watching, they looked like exactly what they were, two people who'd found their perfect match in each other, both personally and professionally. That evening, they attended the premiere of a Broadway show they'd invested in, arriving in their custom Bentley to find the usual crowd of photographers and reporters waiting. Candy stepped out of the car in a stunning black Versace gown that made every camera flash in her direction, while Morgan looked devastating in his tuxedo. They moved down the red carpet like royalty, stopping to pose for photos and answer questions with the ease of people who'd been doing this for years. "Mr. and Mrs. Bruce," a reporter called out, "any truth to the rumors that you're planning to run for political office?" Morgan and Candy exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They'd been having that conversation more and more lately, though neither had made any definitive decisions. "We're focused on building our business empire right now," Candy replied diplomatically, "but we never rule anything out." "You two seem to have the perfect marriage," another reporter pressed. "What's your secret?" This time it was Morgan who answered, his arm tightening around Candy's waist as he looked down at her with undisguised adoration. "The secret is finding someone who makes you want to be better than you ever thought possible. Someone who challenges you, inspires you, and loves you exactly as you are." "And it doesn't hurt that he's devastatingly handsome," Candy added with a laugh that made Morgan's heart skip a beat. Inside the theater, they took their seats in the private box that afforded them both the best view and the most privacy. But Morgan found himself watching his wife more than the performance, mesmerized by the way the stage lights played across her face, by the genuine enjoyment in her expression as she watched the dancers move across the stage. "You're staring again," she whispered without looking at him. "Can you blame me?" Morgan replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Candy turned to face him fully, and in the dim light of the theater box, her eyes seemed to glow with inner fire. "Even after 3 years." "Especially after 3 years," Morgan said, leaning closer until his lips were almost touching her ear. "Every day I discover something new about you to fall in love with." "Careful, Mr. Bruce," Candy breathed, her hand finding his thigh in a touch that was both innocent and incendiary. "Keep talking like that, and we might have to leave early." "Don't tempt me, Mrs. Bruce," Morgan replied, his own hand covering hers, "because I'm seriously considering it." They stayed for the entire performance, but the tension between them built throughout the evening, fed by stolen glances and casual touches that had nothing casual about them. By the time they were back in their Bentley heading home, the air between them was electric. Back in their penthouse, they made love with the passion of newlyweds and the skill of people who knew exactly how to please each other. Later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets, worth more than most people's cars, Candy traced lazy patterns on Morgan's chest with her fingertip. Chapter 5. The Fall, Illness and Desperation. The call came at 3:47 a.m., and Chloe Brooks answered on the first ring because she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. "Chloe," Candy's voice was strained, exhausted in a way that Chloe had never heard before. "I know it's late, but I need you." Those 4 words, "I need you," sent a thrill through Chloe that she carefully kept out of her voice. She'd been watching from the sidelines for 3 years as her former college roommate built an empire with the man Chloe had wanted first, the man she should have had if life had been fair. "Of course, honey," Chloe replied, injecting just the right amount of concern into her tone. "What's wrong?" "It's Morgan," Candy said, and Chloe could hear the fear beneath the exhaustion. "He's sick, Chloe. Really sick. And I can't do this alone." Chloe closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of pure satisfaction before responding. "I'll be on the next flight to New York. Whatever you need, Candy. You know I'd do anything for you." And she would. Anything at all. Even destroy her. 48 hours later, Chloe stood in the marble lobby of Bruce Enterprises, marveling at everything that should have been hers. The building was a monument to success, all gleaming surfaces and soaring architecture that spoke of power and unlimited resources. Employees moved through the space with the confident efficiency of people who knew they worked for winners. And everywhere Chloe looked, she saw evidence of the empire that Morgan and Candy had built together. The empire that could have been hers if she'd been the one to catch Morgan's eye that day in the boardroom. "Chloe!" Candy's voice echoed across the lobby, and Chloe turned to see her former roommate approaching with arms outstretched. Even exhausted and worried, Candy was stunning. Her pregnancy had given her a glow that made her even more beautiful, and her designer maternity clothes couldn't hide the fact that she was still the most elegant woman in any room. They embraced like the old friends they were supposed to be, and Chloe inhaled the scent of Candy's expensive perfume while calculating exactly how long it would take to bring her down. "Thank you for coming," Candy said, pulling back to look at Chloe with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "I know you had your own life to consider, but I didn't know who else to call." "Don't be ridiculous," Chloe replied, squeezing Candy's hands with what appeared to be genuine affection. "You're my best friend. Where else would I be?" The lie came so easily that Chloe almost believed it herself. Morgan's condition was worse than Candy had let on over the phone. The autoimmune disorder had attacked his nervous system, leaving him weak and disoriented for hours at a time. Some days he could barely get out of bed, let alone run a multinational corporation. The treatments were helping but slowly, and the doctors warned that it could be months before he was back to full strength. Chloe found him in his home office, hunched over financial reports with the desperate intensity of a man trying to hold on to control that was slipping through his fingers. He looked up when she entered, and she was shocked by how much the illness had aged him. The vibrant, commanding presence that had first attracted her had been replaced by something fragile and vulnerable. Perfect. "Chloe," Morgan said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Candy told me you were coming to help. I can't tell you how grateful I am." "Anything for family," Chloe replied, settling into the chair across from his desk with practiced grace. "Tell me what you need." For the next 2 hours, Morgan briefed her on the company's operations, his voice growing weaker as the conversation progressed. Chloe listened with apparent attention while actually studying him, cataloguing his weaknesses, identifying the precise pressure points that would make him most vulnerable to her eventual assault. "The European expansion is critical," Morgan was saying, rubbing his temples as another headache began to build. If we can close the London deal. He trailed off, swaying slightly in his chair, and Chloe was beside him in an instant, her hand gentle on his shoulder. You should rest, she said softly, her voice full of concern that was only partially feigned. Kandi will never forgive me if I let you push yourself too hard on my first day. Morgan looked up at her with something like gratitude. She's already carrying too much. The company, the pregnancy, worrying about me. I keep thinking this is all too much for her. She's strong, Chloe said, though the words tasted like poison on her tongue. Stronger than any of us realized. Yes, Morgan agreed, his eyes distant. Sometimes I wonder if she even needs me anymore. The admission hung in the air between them, and Chloe filed it away for future use. Self-doubt, insecurity about his value to his wife, fear of being replaced, all excellent weapons for later. Within a week, Chloe had made herself indispensable. She moved through Bruce Enterprises like she'd been born to it, her MBA from Wharton and years of consulting experience making her the perfect complement to Kandi's visionary leadership. She handled the details that Kandi didn't have time for, managed the personalities that Kandi found tedious, and slowly, carefully, began to position herself as the person everyone turned to when Kandi wasn't available, which was increasingly often. Kandi was working 18-hour days, trying to manage a pregnancy while running a company that demanded constant attention. She was brilliant, but even brilliance had its limits, and Chloe could see the cracks beginning to show. I don't know what I would have done without you, Kandi said one evening as they worked late in her office, reviewing contracts for the German acquisition. Seriously, Chloe, you've been a lifesaver. That's what friends are for, Chloe replied. And for a moment, looking at Kandi's grateful smile, she almost felt guilty about what she was planning. Almost. But then Kandi's phone buzzed with a text from Morgan, and Chloe watched her face light up with love and happiness, and the moment of guilt passed. Kandi had everything, the man, the money, the power, the perfect life that Chloe had dreamed of since college. It was time for that to change. The seduction began subtly, with small gestures that could have been interpreted as simple kindness. Chloe started bringing Morgan his morning coffee, prepared exactly the way he liked it. She remembered details about his preferences, asked thoughtful questions about his treatment, and gradually became the person he turned to when he needed someone to listen. Kandi's so busy, he confided one afternoon when the exhaustion had left him particularly vulnerable. I know she loves me, but sometimes I feel like I'm just another item on her endless to-do list. She's under enormous pressure, Chloe said sympathetically, perching on the edge of his desk in a way that was professional but somehow intimate. But that doesn't mean she doesn't need you. You're her anchor, Morgan. Her strength. It was exactly what he needed to hear, delivered by a woman who was beautiful, attentive, and completely focused on him. Chloe watched the seeds of dependence begin to take root and smiled. By the end of the month, the dynamic in the Bruce household had shifted in ways that were invisible to everyone except Chloe. Kandi came home exhausted from managing crises that Chloe had subtly orchestrated. Morgan grew increasingly dependent on Chloe's attention and support, and Chloe positioned herself as the indispensable bridge between them, the person who understood both their needs and could meet them when they couldn't meet each other's. I should probably find my own place, Chloe mentioned one evening, as the three of them shared dinner in the penthouse. I've been imposing on your hospitality for weeks. Absolutely not, Kandi said immediately. Your family, Chloe. Besides, I need you here. We both do. If you're sure, Chloe replied, her eyes meeting Morgan's across the table. I just want to help however I can. Morgan nodded, his gaze lingering on Chloe's face a moment longer than strictly appropriate. We're grateful to have you. The words were innocent enough, but Chloe heard the undertone of something deeper, something that spoke of needs that weren't being met and attention that was being redirected. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 would be more dangerous, but also more rewarding. The first real crack in the facade appeared on a rainy Thursday evening in October. Candy had been called away to handle an emergency with their Los Angeles office, leaving Morgan and Chloe alone in the penthouse for the first time since she'd arrived. Morgan was having one of his bad days, the illness leaving him weak and disoriented, and Chloe found him sitting in his study, staring out at the city lights with an expression of profound loneliness. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly, settling into the chair beside him with 2 glasses of the expensive whiskey she'd noticed he favored. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," Morgan said, accepting the glass gratefully. "A year ago, I felt like I could conquer the world. Now I can barely make it through a board meeting without falling asleep." "You're being too hard on yourself," Chloe said, her voice warm with sympathy. "You're fighting a serious illness while trying to maintain an empire. That takes incredible strength." "Candy doesn't seem to need anyone's help," Morgan replied, taking a larger sip of whiskey than was probably wise given his medication. "She just adapts, overcomes, succeeds at everything she touches." "She's remarkable," Chloe agreed, and for once she meant it. "But she's also human, even if she doesn't always show it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the whiskey and the intimate setting creating an atmosphere of shared confidence that Chloe had been carefully cultivating for weeks. "Can I tell you something?" Morgan asked suddenly, his voice slightly slurred from the alcohol and exhaustion. "Anything," Chloe replied, leaning forward slightly to show her attention. "Sometimes I wonder if she married the wrong man," Morgan confessed, his eyes still fixed on the city beyond the windows. "She could have had anyone. Someone healthier. Someone who could keep up with her." Chloe set down her glass and moved to the arm of Morgan's chair, her hand finding his shoulder in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but lingered just a moment too long. "Morgan Bruce," she said firmly, "you are exactly the man she needs. Don't ever doubt that." When he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears and something else, gratitude, need, and the beginning of something that could be shaped into whatever Chloe wanted it to become. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being here, for understanding." "Always," Chloe replied, her thumb tracing a small circle on his shoulder. "I'll always be here for you." It was a promise and a threat wrapped in the guise of friendship, and Morgan Bruce, weakened by illness and starved for the kind of attention his pregnant, overworked wife could no longer provide, began to fall into the trap that Chloe Brooks had spent 15 years perfecting. The destruction of Candy's perfect life had officially begun. Chapter 6. The Web Begins. Psychological Manipulation. Chloe Brooks had been studying Candy Simone for 15 years, and she knew exactly how to break her. The revelation came to Chloe on a cold November morning as she stood in Morgan and Candy's walk-in closet, supposedly looking for a file that Candy had asked her to retrieve. But instead of searching for documents, Chloe found herself running her fingers along the silk and cashmere that filled the massive space, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume that clung to every garment. This should have been her life. These should have been her clothes, her jewelry, her husband sleeping in the bed beyond the closet doors. If only Candy hadn't existed. Chloe pulled out a red Valentino dress that she remembered Candy wearing to a charity gala the previous month. In the photos, she'd looked radiant on Morgan's arm, glowing with pregnancy and success, and the kind of happiness that made other women sick with envy. Without thinking, Chloe held the dress up to her body and looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The color was perfect for her complexion. The cut would flatter her figure, and for just a moment, she could imagine what it would feel like to be Mrs. Morgan Bruce instead of the perpetual bridesmaid watching from the sidelines. It would look beautiful on you." Chloe spun around to find Morgan standing in the doorway, dressed in his pajamas and robe, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized how this must look. Her holding his wife's dress, standing in his wife's closet like she belonged there. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, hanging the dress back where she'd found it. "Candy asked me to find the Morrison contract, and I thought it might be in here with her other papers." "It's fine," Morgan said, his voice softer than usual. The medication made him more pliable, more emotional, and Chloe had learned to recognize the signs. "You're right, though. That dress would be stunning on you." There was something in his voice, not quite flirtation, but definitely appreciation, that made Chloe's pulse quicken with possibilities. "It's Candy's," Chloe replied, as if that settled the matter, while internally cataloguing this moment as a significant breakthrough. "Candy has dozens of dresses," Morgan said, moving into the closet with the careful movements of someone still fighting fatigue. "She wouldn't even notice if one went missing." The suggestion hung in the air between them, innocent on the surface but loaded with implications that both of them understood. Chloe let the silence stretch just long enough to be meaningful, before shaking her head with apparent regret. "I couldn't," she said, "but thank you for saying it would look good on me." "You don't need designer clothes to be beautiful, Chloe," Morgan said, and this time there was definitely something more than friendship in his voice. "You're naturally gorgeous." Chloe felt a thrill of victory so intense it was almost sexual. The seeds she'd been planting for months were finally starting to sprout. "You're very kind," she replied, moving toward the door in a way that required her to pass very close to him. "But I should let you rest. Candy will be back from Chicago tonight, and she'll want you to have your strength." As she brushed past him, Chloe made sure their arms touched, just briefly, just enough to send a spark of electricity between them. Morgan's sharp intake of breath told her the contact hadn't gone unnoticed. "Chloe," he called softly as she reached the bedroom door. "Yes?" She turned back, her expression carefully neutral despite the triumph singing in her veins. "Thank you," Morgan said, "for everything. I don't know what we would have done without you." "That's what friends are for," Chloe replied with a smile that was both innocent and knowing. But as she left him standing in the closet, surrounded by his wife's beautiful things, Chloe was already planning her next move. Because friendship was just the beginning. The psychological warfare escalated when Candy lost the baby. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late November, sudden and devastating and final. Candy was in a board meeting when the cramping started, and by the time Chloe got her to the hospital, it was too late. The pregnancy that had represented their future, their growing family, their next chapter together, was gone. Chloe held Candy as she sobbed in the sterile hospital room, making soothing sounds and stroking her hair while internally marveling at how perfectly this played into her plans. A grieving, vulnerable Candy would be so much easier to manipulate than the confident woman who thought she had everything under control. "I can't tell Morgan like this," Candy whispered through her tears. "He's been so happy about the baby. It's the only thing that's been keeping him positive through his treatment." "I'll tell him," Chloe offered immediately. "Let me handle this, honey. You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." Candy's grateful squeeze of her hand was almost enough to make Chloe feel guilty. Almost. Chloe found Morgan in his study, reviewing financial reports with the desperate intensity of a man trying to prove he was still useful despite his illness. She delivered the news with exactly the right amount of gentle sympathy, watched his face crumble with grief, and was there with comfort when he needed it most. "She's blaming herself," Chloe said as Morgan sat with his head in his hands. "She thinks the stress of running the company while you've been sick caused this." "It's not her fault," Morgan said fiercely. though Chloe could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. "It's mine. If I hadn't gotten sick, if I could have carried my share of the load." "Don't do that to yourself," Chloe said softly, moving to kneel beside his chair. "This isn't anyone's fault. Sometimes terrible things just happen." But even as she offered comfort, Chloe was carefully planting seeds of guilt and responsibility that would fester in the coming weeks. Morgan already felt useless because of his illness. Now he would feel responsible for the loss of their child. It was cruel and calculated and absolutely perfect for her purposes. The months that followed were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Kandi threw herself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, as if she could outrun her grief by burying herself in quarterly reports and acquisition deals. She was at the office before dawn and didn't come home until after midnight. And when she was home, she was distant and distracted, a shadow of the vibrant woman she'd once been. Morgan, still weakened by his illness and now devastated by the loss of their child, watched his wife retreat into herself and felt helpless to reach her. The treatments were working, slowly, but his recovery was hampered by depression and a growing sense that he was failing at everything that mattered. And Chloe was there for both of them, the perfect friend who anticipated their needs and met them before they even had to ask. For Kandi, she became the competent assistant who handled the details that grief made overwhelming. She managed schedules, fielded calls, and slowly took over more and more of the daily operations that Kandi couldn't focus on anymore. For Morgan, she became something more dangerous, the understanding confidant who listened without judgment, who made him feel valued and appreciated when his own wife seemed to look through him like he wasn't there. "She's different now," Morgan confided to Chloe one evening when Kandi had cancelled dinner plans to handle a crisis in their Tokyo office. "I know she's grieving, but it's like she's pulling away from me completely." "Grief affects everyone differently," Chloe said, settling beside him on the leather sofa in his study with 2 glasses of wine. "Some people need to process alone before they can share their feelings." "But we used to share everything," Morgan said, his voice heavy with loss that had nothing to do with the miscarriage. "We were a team. Now I feel like I'm just in the way." Chloe let the silence stretch for a moment, as if she was carefully considering her words. "Maybe she needs to see that you're still the strong man she married," she suggested gently. "Maybe if you took more control of the situation, showed more leadership." It was subtle manipulation disguised as helpful advice, designed to make Morgan feel like he needed to prove himself while simultaneously undermining his confidence in his wife's feelings for him. "I don't know if I have the strength for that anymore," Morgan admitted, and Chloe felt another thrill of victory. "You're stronger than you think," she said, placing her hand over his in a gesture that was becoming increasingly familiar. "You just need someone who believes in you." The implication was clear. Kandi didn't believe in him anymore, but Chloe did. By Christmas, the dynamics in the Bruce household had shifted so dramatically that even outsiders began to notice. At the company holiday party, held in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, Kandi moved through the crowd like a beautiful automaton, smiling and making conversation, but radiating a chill that kept people at arm's length. She was thinner than she'd ever been, all sharp angles and restless energy. And when she looked at Morgan, it was with the distant politeness of strangers. Morgan, meanwhile, stayed close to Chloe's side, relying on her to navigate conversations and handle social situations that his illness and depression made difficult. To anyone watching, it looked like Chloe was his wife and Kandi was the distant business partner. "Is everything all right between you and Morgan?" James Patterson asked Kandi during a quiet moment near the bar. "You two seem distant lately." Kandi's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "We're fine, James. Just busy building an empire while dealing with personal challenges." But her eyes kept drifting across the room to where Morgan and Chloe were deep in conversation with a group of investors, her expression unreadable but definitely not happy. "Chloe's been a godsend," one of the board members' wives commented to Candy later in the evening. "The way she takes care of Morgan is so sweet. You're lucky to have such a devoted friend." "Yes," Candy replied tightly, "very lucky." But as she watched Chloe laugh at something Morgan said, her hand touching his arm in a gesture that was just intimate enough to be noticed, Candy felt the first stirring of something that wasn't grief or exhaustion. It was suspicion. The final piece of Chloe's psychological web fell into place on New Year's Eve. Candy had been called away to London to handle a crisis with their European expansion, leaving Morgan and Chloe alone to ring in the new year. Chloe had suggested a quiet evening at home, just the two of them, and Morgan had agreed with the grateful relief of a man who was tired of pretending to be stronger than he felt. They'd shared dinner, wine, and increasingly intimate conversation as the evening progressed. Chloe had worn a dress she'd bought specifically for this night, black silk that hugged her curves and made her look like a woman worth betraying a marriage for. "I keep thinking about what this year has taken from us," Morgan said as they sat together on the sofa in his study, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. "The baby, my health, the distance between Candy and me." "But look at what this year has brought too," Chloe said softly, moving closer to him on the sofa. "You've discovered how strong you really are. You've learned who your true friends are." She was close enough now that he could smell her perfume, different from Candy's, but equally intoxicating, close enough that when she reached up to touch his face, her fingers traced the line of his jaw with unmistakable intimacy. "Chloe," Morgan whispered, but he didn't pull away. "You deserve to be appreciated," Chloe murmured, her thumb brushing across his lower lip. "You deserve to be loved the way you love others." In the distance, they could hear the countdown beginning on the television in the living room. 10, 9, 8. "This is wrong," Morgan said, but his hands were already moving to her waist, pulling her closer. "What's wrong is letting yourself feel guilty for wanting to be happy," Chloe replied, her lips now just inches from his. 3, 2, 1. When the clock struck midnight, ushering in a new year and a new chapter in all their lives, Morgan Bruce kissed his wife's best friend with 15 years' worth of pent-up desire and desperate need for connection. And Chloe Brooks kissed him back with the triumph of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. The destruction of Candy's perfect life was no longer a plan. It was reality. Chapter 7. The Invisible War. Candy senses danger. Candy Bruce had built a $500 million empire by trusting her instincts, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that something was wrong. The realization hit her like ice water in her veins as she stood in the doorway of her own kitchen at 6 a.m., watching her husband pour coffee for another woman. Not just any woman, Chloe Brooks, her supposed best friend, who was wearing one of Candy's silk robes and sitting at Candy's breakfast table like she belonged there. "Morning, honey," Morgan said when he noticed her, his voice carrying a guilt that he was trying too hard to hide. "I didn't hear you come in last night." "The London meetings ran late," Candy replied carefully, her analyst's mind already cataloguing details. Morgan's hair was disheveled in a way that suggested he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. Chloe's makeup was slightly smudged, as if she'd slept in it, and the coffee Morgan was pouring was prepared exactly the way Chloe liked it. Cream, no sugar, which meant he'd been paying attention to her preferences. Intimate attention. "I hope you don't mind," Chloe said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I had a terrible headache last night, and Morgan was kind enough to let me stay in the guest room instead of going back to my apartment." The explanation was perfectly reasonable, perfectly innocent, and perfectly designed to explain away anything Candy might have noticed, which meant Chloe had been prepared for this conversation, had thought through potential questions and crafted answers in advance. That level of calculation suggested guilt, and guilt suggested secrets. Of course, Candy said smoothly, moving to the espresso machine to make her own coffee. I'm glad Morgan was able to help. But as she went through the motions of her morning routine, Candy's mind was working like the high-powered computer that had made her legendary in business circles. She thought about the past few months, about small changes she'd attributed to grief and stress, but which suddenly looked different in this new light. The way Chloe had gradually taken over more and more responsibilities, making herself indispensable. The way Morgan had started turning to Chloe for comfort instead of his wife. The way conversations stopped when Candy entered a room. The looks that passed between them when they thought she wasn't watching. How had she been so blind? The answer came to her as she sat in her office later that morning, staring at a financial report she couldn't focus on. She hadn't been blind. She'd been grieving, exhausted and overwhelmed by the impossible task of running an empire while watching her husband fight an illness that had stolen his strength and confidence. She'd been so focused on keeping their business afloat and their lives together that she'd missed the predator who'd moved into her home disguised as salvation. Chloe Brooks. Sweet, helpful, devoted Chloe, who'd been there for every crisis, who'd anticipated every need, who'd made herself so essential that removing her would cause more problems than keeping her. It was a brilliant strategy, Candy had to admit. Textbook manipulation designed to create dependency while gradually eroding the target's support system. If Candy had encountered this scenario in a business context, she would have admired the execution even as she destroyed the perpetrator. But this wasn't business. This was personal. This was her marriage, her husband, her life being systematically dismantled by someone she'd trusted completely. The rage that filled Candy was cold and precise, the kind of fury that had made her legendary in boardrooms across 3 continents. It wasn't the hot, destructive anger of betrayed emotion. It was the calculating wrath of a predator who'd just realized she was being hunted. Game on. Candy's first move was to test her theory, and the opportunity came sooner than expected. That afternoon, she announced that she needed to make an emergency trip to Los Angeles to handle problems with their West Coast expansion. It was true, there were issues that needed her attention, but it was also the perfect excuse to see what happened when she left Morgan and Chloe alone together. "I'll only be gone overnight," she told Morgan as she packed her Louis Vuitton overnight bag. "Chloe can handle anything that comes up here." "I hate that you have to travel so much," Morgan said, but there was something in his voice that sounded more like relief than regret. "Maybe I should come with you. I'm feeling stronger these days." "The doctors said you shouldn't fly until you finished this round of treatment," Candy replied, watching his face carefully. "Besides, Chloe needs you here to help with the Morrison contracts." The mention of Chloe's name caused a subtle change in Morgan's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight smile that he quickly suppressed. It was the look of a man thinking about someone who made him happy, and it confirmed everything Candy had suspected. "You're right," Morgan said. "I'll hold down the fort." Candy kissed him goodbye, noting that he seemed distracted, like he was already thinking about what he would do once she was gone. As her driver pulled away from their building, she saw Chloe's figure in the window of Morgan's study, and even from 20 floors below, Candy could sense the anticipation radiating from her supposed best friend. The Los Angeles trip was productive in ways that had nothing to do with business. Candy handled the expansion issues in record time, then spent the rest of her time making phone calls to people she hadn't spoken to in months. Old friends from college, who might remember things about Chloe that Candy had forgotten. Former colleagues who'd worked with Chloe at previous jobs, anyone who might provide insight into the woman who was currently destroying her marriage. What she learned made her blood run cold. "Chloe Brooks," said Patricia Hendricks, who'd been their residential advisor at Stanford. "Oh my God, Candy, please tell me you're not still in touch with her." "Why?" Candy asked, though she was already dreading the answer. Because she was obsessed with you in college. Seriously obsessed. She used to copy everything you did, your clothes, your hairstyle, even the guys you dated. We all thought it was weird, but we figured she'd grow out of it. The next call was to Jennifer Walsh, who'd worked with Chloe at McKinsey & Company 5 years earlier. She got fired, Jennifer said bluntly, for having an affair with a married partner. The guy's wife found out and threatened to sue the firm for harassment. They quietly let Chloe go to avoid a scandal. By the time Candy boarded her flight back to New York, she had a complete picture of the woman she'd invited into her home. Chloe Brooks wasn't just a friend who'd made a mistake. She was a predator who'd been stalking Candy's life for 15 years, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take what she'd always believed should have been hers. The confirmation came when Candy arrived home 12 hours earlier than expected. She used her private elevator to avoid the front desk, moving through her own penthouse like a thief in the night. The living areas were empty, but she could hear voices coming from Morgan's study. Low, intimate conversation, punctuated by soft laughter. Candy moved closer, her designer heels silent on the Italian marble floors, until she could see through the partially open door. Morgan was sitting in his leather chair, looking healthier and more animated than he had in months. Chloe was perched on the arm of the chair, her hand resting on his shoulder, wearing a dress that Candy recognized as one of her own, the red Valentino that she'd thought she'd misplaced weeks ago. "You look beautiful in that dress," Morgan was saying, his hand coming up to cover Chloe's. "Red has always been your color." "I was hoping you'd like it," Chloe replied, her voice carrying the husky undertone of a woman who knew she was desired. "I wanted to look special for you." Candy watched her husband lift Chloe's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that was unmistakably romantic. She watched Chloe's fingers tangle in Morgan's hair, pulling him closer for a kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. She watched her marriage die in real time, destroyed by the two people she'd trusted most in the world. But instead of falling apart, instead of bursting into the room with accusations and tears, Candy Bruce did what she'd always done when faced with an impossible situation. She strategized. Retreating to her home office, Candy began planning with the cold precision that had made her a legend in the business world. First, she needed evidence, pictures, recordings, documented proof of the affair that would be admissible in divorce court and devastating to both Morgan's reputation and Chloe's career. Her penthouse was equipped with a sophisticated security system that she could access remotely. It would be simple to ensure that certain activities were captured in high definition. Second, she needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Was this just an affair, or was there more? Had Chloe been manipulating business decisions, stealing confidential information, planning to leave with Morgan and start their own company? Third, she needed to decide what she wanted from the aftermath. Revenge was a given. No one destroyed Candy Bruce's life without paying a steep price. But what form should that revenge take? Financial ruin, public humiliation, complete and total destruction of everything they held dear? As she sat in her darkened office, surrounded by the empire she'd built with love and trust, Candy felt something inside her crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. Chloe Brooks had spent 15 years studying her, learning her weaknesses, planning her downfall. But Chloe had made one critical error in her calculations. She'd forgotten that Candy Bruce was the most dangerous predator in any room she entered. And now the real game was about to begin. The next morning, Candy entered the kitchen wearing a smile that could have powered the entire city. "Good morning, darling," she said to Morgan, kissing him with exactly the right amount of affection. "I missed you." "I missed you too," Morgan replied, but his eyes kept darting to Chloe, who was standing by the coffee machine in yet another of Candy's robes. "And Chloe," Candy continued, turning to her supposed best friend with arms outstretched, "thank you for taking such good care of my husband while I was away." They embraced like sisters, like the old friends they were supposed to be, and Candy felt Chloe tense slightly in her arms. Good. Let her wonder if Candy suspected anything. Let her worry about what Candy might have seen or heard. "It was my pleasure," Chloe replied, her voice steady, but her eyes watchful. "Morgan's such wonderful company." "Yes," Candy agreed, her smile never wavering. "He certainly is." For the next hour, they went through the motions of a normal morning, discussing schedules, reviewing the day's priorities, making plans for the weekend. But underneath the surface pleasantries, a different conversation was taking place. Chloe was watching Candy for signs that her deception had been discovered. Morgan was radiating guilt while trying to act normal, and Candy was cataloguing every micro-expression, every tell, every indication of how deep the betrayal went. It was fascinating in a sociopathic sort of way, like watching lab rats navigate a maze that only she could see. "I should get to the office," Candy finally announced, gathering her things with brisk efficiency. "The Morrison deal won't close itself." "I'll drive you," Morgan offered, but Candy waved him off. "Don't be silly. You should rest. Besides, I'm sure Chloe has plenty to keep you busy." The words were innocent enough, but Candy saw the way both Morgan and Chloe froze at the implication. Perfect. Let them stew in their own paranoia for a while. As Candy's driver pulled away from the building, she caught a glimpse of Chloe at the window, watching her leave with an expression that was equal parts relief and suspicion. "You should be suspicious," Candy thought, "because I'm about to destroy you so completely that you'll wish you'd never heard my name." The hunt was on, and Candy Bruce had never failed to catch her prey. That evening, Candy made her first overt move in what would become the most important chess game of her life. She came home early, announcing her presence loudly as she entered the penthouse. She found Morgan and Chloe in the living room, sitting just a little too far apart, their faces carefully neutral in a way that screamed guilt. "I have wonderful news," Candy announced, settling into her favorite chair with a glass of wine. "I've decided we need a vacation, all of us, together." The silence that followed was deafening. "A vacation?" Morgan repeated, his voice carefully controlled. "Yes," Candy said brightly. "I think we've all been under too much stress lately. We need time to reconnect, to remember what's important. I've already spoken to the realtor about our beach house in the Hamptons. We can spend a long weekend there, just the three of us." She watched Chloe's face go pale, watched Morgan's hands clench and unclench in his lap. The beach house was isolated, private, the perfect place for confrontations without witnesses. "That sounds lovely," Chloe managed, but her voice was strained. "Doesn't it?" Candy agreed. "Just like old times. We can cook together, talk about the future, really spend some quality time as a family." The word family hit like a physical blow. Chloe actually flinched, and Morgan looked like he might be sick. "When were you thinking?" Morgan asked. Candy's smile was radiant and terrifying. "This weekend. I've already cleared our schedules." As she watched her husband and his mistress struggle to hide their horror at the prospect of a romantic weekend that would include his wife, Candy felt the first stirring of satisfaction she'd experienced since discovering their betrayal. The beach house would be perfect for what she had planned, isolated, private, and equipped with all the technology she'd need to document their destruction. This weekend, the truth would finally come out, and Chloe Brooks would learn what happened when you tried to hunt a queen. Chapter 8. Setting the Perfect Trap, Solo Mastermind. Friday morning arrived like the opening move in a chess game where only one player knew all the rules. Candy stood in her walk-in closet, selecting her outfit for the weekend with the same precision she used when choosing weapons for a corporate takeover. Black jeans that made her legs look endless. A white silk blouse that suggested innocence while highlighting her dangerous curves. Jewelry that whispered wealth and power without screaming it. She was packing for war, disguised as a romantic getaway. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Morgan asked from the bedroom, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Maybe we should postpone until I'm feeling stronger." Candy emerged from the closet with her Louis Vuitton weekend bag, her expression serene despite the predatory calculation burning behind her eyes. "Darling, the doctor said the sea air would be good for your recovery. Besides, we all need this time together." The words were warm and loving, but Morgan heard the steel underneath. In the 3 days since Candy had announced this weekend trip, she'd been different, still affectionate, still the perfect wife, but with an edge that made him feel like he was walking on a tightrope over an abyss. "Where's Chloe?" Candy asked, checking her watch with theatrical concern. "The car will be here in 20 minutes. She's not feeling well," Morgan stammered. "Food poisoning from that new sushi place. She might not be able to make it." Candy's smile could have frozen the Hudson River. "How unfortunate. I suppose I'll have to call and check on her personally." Before Morgan could object, she was dialing Chloe's number, her fingers moving over the phone with predatory grace. "Chloe, darling," Candy said when the call connected, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Morgan tells me you're ill. That's simply tragic, considering how much I was looking forward to our girls' time this weekend." Through the speaker, Chloe's voice was carefully weak. "I'm so sorry, Candy. I've been throwing up all night. I don't think I can travel." "Nonsense," Candy replied briskly. "I have the perfect remedy for food poisoning. My driver will pick you up in 30 minutes. After all, what are best friends for?" The silence on the other end was deafening. Chloe was trapped, and they both knew it. Refusing to come now would look suspicious, especially since Candy was being so understanding and helpful. "That's very kind of you," Chloe finally managed. "Wonderful," Candy said. "See you soon." She hung up and turned to Morgan with that same brilliant, terrifying smile. "Crisis averted. Now we can have our perfect weekend together." Morgan looked like a man facing his own execution. The 2-hour drive to the Hamptons passed in suffocating tension, disguised as pleasant conversation. Candy sat in the back of their Mercedes SUV between Morgan and Chloe, chatting about business deals and vacation plans, while her husband and his mistress struggled to maintain their facades. The driver, separated by soundproof glass, was oblivious to the psychological warfare being conducted in the back seat. "I've been thinking about redecorating the beach house," Candy mentioned casually as they turned onto the private road that led to their property. "Something more intimate, more romantic." Chloe stiffened almost imperceptibly. "It's beautiful the way it is." "Oh, but it could be so much more," Candy continued, her voice dreamy with false nostalgia. "Remember our honeymoon, darling? How we spent 3 days in bed, barely coming up for air." Morgan's face went ashen. Beside him, Chloe was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "That was a long time ago," Morgan said weakly. "Not so long," Candy corrected, her hand finding his thigh in a possessive gesture that made him flinch. "Some things are worth remembering, worth repeating." The beach house appeared through the trees like something from a fairy tale, or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. 3 stories of weathered cedar and glass, with wraparound decks that offered stunning views of the Atlantic Ocean. It was isolated, private, and absolutely perfect for Candy's purposes. "Home sweet home," she announced, as the car came to a stop in the circular driveway. While Morgan and Chloe brought in the luggage, Candy moved through the house with the efficiency of a general preparing for battle. The beach house had been her wedding gift to Morgan, a place where they could escape the pressures of business and focus on each other. She'd had it designed with every luxury imaginable: a gourmet kitchen, a master suite with panoramic ocean views, guest rooms that rivals 5-star hotels, and a hidden security system that could record every conversation in the house. Candy activated that system now, using her phone to ensure that every room was being monitored. By the time the weekend was over, she would have more than enough evidence to destroy both Morgan and Chloe in divorce court. "The Wi-Fi password is forever together," she called out to Chloe, who was struggling with her phone in the living room. One word with hyphens. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "I think I'll make my famous seafood risotto tonight," Candy continued, moving into the kitchen with predatory grace. "Morgan, remember how much you used to love it when I cooked for you?" "I still do," Morgan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "And Chloe, you can help," Candy added sweetly. "I know how much you enjoy serving others." The double meaning hit its target. Chloe's face flushed red, and she suddenly found the ocean view very interesting. "I should call Derek," Chloe said suddenly. "Let him know I arrived safely." "Of course," Candy agreed. "Give him my love. Tell him how much I'm looking forward to seeing him again soon." It was a throwaway comment, meaningless small talk, but Candy noticed how Chloe's face went pale at the mention of her husband. Interesting. There was clearly more to that relationship than met the eye. Mental note: investigate Derek Brooks. The afternoon passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of tension and false normalcy. They took a walk on the beach, Candy linking arms with both Morgan and Chloe like they were a happy family instead of a triangle of betrayal and revenge. She pointed out the improvements she'd made to the property, the new deck furniture, the renovated guest house where visiting friends could stay in complete privacy. "Remember when we first brought Chloe here?" Candy asked as they stood on the main deck, watching the waves crash against the shore. "Right after the wedding, you said this was the perfect place for intimate gatherings." "I remember," Chloe said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made Candy look at her more closely. "You seemed so fascinated by everything," Candy continued, "the way Morgan and I lived, our routines, our private moments. You watched us like you were studying for an exam." The observation hung in the air like an accusation. Chloe's hands were trembling as she gripped the deck railing, and Morgan was staring out at the ocean like he wished he could disappear beneath the waves. "I was just happy for you both," Chloe managed. "Were you?" Candy asked, her voice deceptively mild. "I sometimes wondered if you weren't a little envious. After all, we had everything you wanted." "I have Derek," Chloe said quickly. "I have my own life." "Yes," Candy agreed. "Derek, how is your marriage, Chloe? Are you happy?" The question was casual, conversational, but it hit like a precision strike. Chloe's face crumpled for just a moment before she regained control, but it was long enough for Candy to see the truth. Chloe's marriage was a disaster, which explained so much about her willingness to destroy someone else's. Dinner was a masterpiece of psychological warfare disguised as a friendly meal. Candy had prepared Morgan's favorite dishes, the ones she used to make when they were newlyweds and couldn't keep their hands off each other. She served the wine he loved, told the stories he found funny, and generally reminded him of everything he was throwing away for a few stolen moments with a woman who had never truly loved him. "Remember our 3rd anniversary dinner?" she asked as she served dessert, chocolate souffle, another of Morgan's weaknesses. "You said I was the most incredible woman you'd ever met, that you couldn't imagine loving anyone more." Morgan's fork clattered against his plate. "Candy." "What?" she asked innocently. "I was just reminiscing. Surely you remember? It was right here, at this table. You got down on one knee again and promised me that nothing would ever come between us." Chloe was studying her wine glass like it contained the secrets of the universe, her face carefully neutral despite the emotional brutality she was witnessing. "People change," Morgan said weakly. "Do they?" Candy asked, her voice soft but deadly. "Or do they just reveal who they really were all along?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Later that evening, Candy made her final preparations while Morgan and Chloe pretended to watch a movie in the living room. She sent a text to Derek Brooks from her secure phone, the one she used for her most sensitive business dealings. "We need to talk. It's about your wife. Meet me tomorrow at the Starbucks on Main Street in East Hampton at 9 a.m. Come alone. Trust me, you'll want to hear what I have to say." Then she activated the house's security system to record everything, positioned her hidden cameras for optimal coverage, and prepared for the confrontation that would end 3 years of marriage and 15 years of friendship. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. Tomorrow, Chloe Brooks would learn what happened when you tried to steal from a queen. And tomorrow, Morgan Bruce would discover that the woman he'd betrayed was far more dangerous than the woman he'd betrayed her with. As Candy lay in the master bedroom that night, listening to the ocean waves crash against the shore, she felt a calm settle over her that she hadn't experienced since discovering the affair. The rage was still there, burning cold and bright in her chest, but it was controlled now, focused, weaponized. She'd built a $500 million empire by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than her competition. Destroying the two people who'd betrayed her would be child's play. At exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, Derek Brooks walked into the Starbucks looking like a man who'd been expecting this conversation for months. He was handsome in a conventional way, tall, blonde, athletic, but there was something broken in his eyes that spoke of a man who'd been fighting a losing battle for far too long. When he saw Candy sitting in a corner booth, his shoulders sagged with what looked like relief. "Mrs. Bruce," he said as he approached her table, "thank you for reaching out." "Candy, please," she replied, gesturing for him to sit. "And thank you for coming. I think we have a lot to discuss." Derek ordered coffee with the mechanical movements of a man going through the motions of normalcy while his world fell apart. When he returned to the table, Candy was studying him with the sharp focus that had made her legendary in business circles. "How long have you known?" she asked without preamble. Derek's laugh was bitter. "About the affair, or about the fact that my wife has been obsessed with you since college?" The admission hit Candy like a physical blow. "What? You really don't know, do you?" Derek said, his voice filled with the kind of exhaustion that came from years of fighting an impossible battle. "Chloe didn't just happen to become friends with you at Stanford. She requested you as a roommate specifically. She'd been following your academic career, your family background, everything." Candy felt the world shift beneath her feet. "That's impossible. We met randomly." "Nothing about Chloe's relationship with you has ever been random," Derek interrupted. "She has photo albums full of pictures of you from college, newspaper clippings about your business success. She even bought the same perfume you wore to your wedding." The pieces of a puzzle Candy hadn't even known existed began falling into place with terrifying clarity. "She's been planning this for 15 years, Derek continued. "Waiting for the perfect opportunity to take your life. When your husband got sick and you needed help, she saw her chance." Candy's hands were trembling as she reached for her coffee cup. "Why are you telling me this?" Derek's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Because I'm tired of being married to a woman who's in love with someone else's life, and because what I have to show you will help you destroy her completely." He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a photo of Chloe's home office, walls covered with pictures of Candy and Morgan, newspaper clippings about their business success, even photos of their penthouse that had obviously been taken without permission. "There's more," Derek said quietly. "So much more. Financial records showing she's been stealing from her clients to fund the lifestyle she thinks she deserves. Evidence of the affair she had with my business partner that destroyed my last company. Even medical records showing she's been lying about her mental health for years." Candy stared at the photos, her brilliant mind processing the implications at light speed. This wasn't just an affair. This was stalking, obsession, possibly even criminal behavior. "What do you want in return?" she asked, because there was always a price for information this valuable. "Help me disappear," Derek said simply. "I've got offshore accounts she doesn't know about, a new identity waiting in the Cayman Islands. I just need a distraction big enough to cover my escape." Kandi looked at this broken man across from her and felt something that might have been sympathy if it hadn't been overshadowed by her burning need for revenge. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "I think we can help each other." By the time Kandi returned to the beach house at noon, she had everything she needed to obliterate Chloe Brooks from existence. Financial records, medical records, photos of the stalker shrine, recorded conversations where Chloe admitted to planning Kandi's downfall, even evidence of criminal activity that would put her in prison for years. Derek had been collecting evidence for months, preparing for this moment, and now he was handing it all over to the one person who could use it effectively. "Where have you been?" Morgan asked as she entered the house, his voice tight with anxiety. "You were gone for hours." "Just running errands," Kandi replied breezily. "Getting everything ready for our special evening." "Special evening?" Chloe asked, emerging from the kitchen with a glass of wine in her hand and guilt written all over her face. "Oh yes," Kandi said, her smile radiant and terrifying. "I have such wonderful surprises planned for both of you. Tonight is going to be absolutely unforgettable." As she watched Morgan and Chloe exchange panicked glances, Kandi felt the last piece of her plan click into place. Derek would disappear within the next few hours, leaving behind a carefully crafted trail of evidence that would lead investigators to the truth about his wife. The security cameras would capture everything that happened next, and, by tomorrow morning, Chloe Brooks would wish she'd never heard the name Kandi Bruce. The trap was set. Now all that remained was springing it. Chapter 9. Secrets Unravel. The final hours before the storm felt like the last moments of a condemned man's life. By late afternoon, the beach house had transformed into a pressure cooker of barely controlled tension. Morgan paced the living room like a caged animal, his hands shaking as he checked his phone obsessively for messages that never came. Chloe sat by the window, staring out at the churning Atlantic with the hollow-eyed expression of someone who knew their world was about to end, and Kandi moved through it all like a graceful predator, humming softly as she prepared what she kept calling their special dinner, her every movement calculated to increase the psychological pressure on her victims. "You seem nervous, darling," she observed, as Morgan knocked over his wineglass for the second time in an hour. "Is something wrong?" "No," Morgan replied too quickly, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Just tired. The sea air, you know." Kandi murmured, dabbing at the spilled wine with a cloth napkin. "Strange. The sea air usually makes you so energetic. Remember our honeymoon? We barely slept for 3 days." The reminder of their passionate past hit like a physical blow. Morgan's face went ashen, and across the room, Chloe's hands clenched into fists on her lap. "Chloe, honey," Kandi continued sweetly, "you've barely touched your wine. Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," Chloe managed, though her voice was strained. "Just thinking about Derek. He seemed upset when I called him earlier. It was a lie, and they all knew it." Chloe hadn't called her husband. She'd been too busy whispering with Morgan in hushed, desperate conversations that stopped abruptly whenever Kandi entered the room. "Oh?" Kandi asked, her interest seeming casual but her eyes sharp as surgical steel. "What about?" "Work stress," Chloe said quickly. "You know how it is." "Actually, I don't," Kandi replied, settling into her chair with predatory grace. "Derek's always struck me as such a calm, stable man. What kind of work stress could make him upset?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to spring. Chloe's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her mind clearly scrambling for an answer that would make sense. Financial pressures, she finally said. The usual. How terrible, Candy sympathized. If you need help, you know Morgan and I would be happy to lend you money. What are friends for? The offer was generous and completely sincere sounding, which made it all the more devastating. Chloe's face crumpled slightly before she regained control, but not before Candy saw the flash of pure terror in her eyes. Because if Derek was having financial problems, if their marriage was falling apart, if Chloe's life was imploding, then what did she have to lose by destroying someone else's? Everything was falling into place exactly as Candy had planned. As the sun began to set over the Atlantic, casting the beach house in shades of gold and crimson, Candy made her final preparations. She moved through the kitchen with the fluid efficiency of a woman who'd prepared hundreds of meals for the man she loved. But there was something different about her movements now. Something predatory and purposeful that made both Morgan and Chloe watch her with the nervous attention of prey animals, sensing a threat they couldn't quite identify. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," Candy announced, checking the roast that was browning in the oven. "I thought we could eat on the deck, watch the sunset. It's supposed to be particularly beautiful tonight." "That sounds lovely," Chloe said, but her voice was hollow, mechanical. "Doesn't it?" Candy agreed. "I've been looking forward to this evening for days. There's so much I want to share with both of you." Morgan and Chloe exchanged a look that was pure panic. Whatever Candy had planned, they both sensed it wasn't going to be the romantic evening she kept promising. "Maybe I should call Derek again," Chloe said suddenly, reaching for her phone. "Make sure he's—" "Oh, don't worry about Derek," Candy interrupted, her voice carrying a strange note that made both Morgan and Chloe freeze. "I'm sure he's exactly where he needs to be right now." The words were innocent enough, but something in Candy's tone sent ice through Chloe's veins. There was a knowing quality to it, a confidence that suggested Candy knew more about Derek's whereabouts than she should. "What do you mean?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Candy's smile was radiant and terrifying. "Just that everything has a way of working out exactly as it should. Don't you think?" Before Chloe could respond, Candy's phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, and her smile widened. "Perfect timing," she murmured, typing a quick response. "The evening is about to become much more interesting." At exactly 7 o'clock, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of fire, Candy called them to dinner. The deck table had been set with their finest china and crystal, the kind they usually reserved for important business dinners or special anniversaries. Candles flickered in hurricane glasses, creating intimate pools of light that should have been romantic, but felt more like spotlights illuminating a crime scene. "This is beautiful," Morgan said weakly, taking his usual seat at the head of the table. "Thank you, darling," Candy replied, settling into her chair with fluid grace. "I wanted tonight to be special, memorable." Chloe sat across from Candy, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. The three of them made a perfect triangle, but instead of suggesting harmony, the geometry felt like a battle formation. "Shall we make a toast?" Candy suggested, raising her glass. "To friendship, to loyalty, to the truth finally coming to light." The words hit like physical blows. Morgan's glass shook in his hand, and Chloe went so pale that her makeup stood out like war paint against her ashen skin. "To friendship," Morgan echoed weakly. "To truth," Chloe whispered, and the words sounded like a death sentence. They drank in silence, the excellent wine tasting like ash in their mouths. Around them, the ocean breeze carried the salt scent of the sea and the sound of waves crashing against the shore with increasing violence. A storm was coming in from the Atlantic, and the first drops of rain began to spatter against the deck furniture. "We should probably go inside," Morgan suggested, but Candy waved him off. "Not yet," she said. "I love storms. There's something so cleansing about them. The way they wash everything clean, reveal what was hidden beneath the surface. As if summoned by her words, lightning flickered on the horizon, followed by the distant rumble of thunder. The storm was still miles away, but its presence felt like an omen. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Candy continued conversationally, cutting into her roast with surgical precision. "About friendship, about trust, about how well we really know the people closest to us." "Candy," Morgan began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "For instance," she continued, "I thought I knew everything about both of you. After all, we've been so close for so long. Morgan, my devoted husband, Chloe, my loyal best friend. But recently, I've discovered that people can surprise you in the most fascinating ways." Chloe's fork clattered against her plate. "What kind of surprises?" Candy's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "Oh, all kinds. Would you like me to share some of them?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Both Morgan and Chloe looked like they were about to be sick, their faces pale and strained in the flickering candlelight. "I learned, for example, that some people aren't who they pretend to be," Candy said, her voice soft but deadly. "That some people can spend years planning and waiting for the perfect moment to take what they want." "I don't know what you mean," Chloe said, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't you?" Candy asked, tilting her head like a curious cat. "That's strange, because I have so much evidence to the contrary." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, setting it on the table between them like a bomb waiting to explode. "This contains some very interesting photographs," Candy said casually, "and documents, and recordings. Would you like to see them?" Morgan's face went from pale to green. "Candy, please." "Please what?" Candy asked, her voice still conversational, but with an edge that could have sliced through steel. "Please don't share the truth. Please don't reveal what's been happening in my own home, under my own roof, with my own husband." The words hit like physical blows. Chloe actually flinched, and Morgan looked like he might collapse. "It's not what you think," Morgan said desperately. "Isn't it?" Candy asked, opening the folder with deliberate slowness. "Because these photos seem pretty clear to me. Would you like to see them, Chloe? I think you look particularly lovely in the red dress, my red dress." Chloe's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow, like a panic attack was building in her chest. "Candy, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can," Candy said smoothly. "You've always been so good with explanations, so creative with the truth. But I don't think explanations are necessary anymore, do you?" Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now, and the rain began falling harder, drumming against the deck with increasing intensity. The storm was approaching fast, mirroring the tempest that was about to break over their carefully constructed lives. "The fascinating thing," Candy continued, "is how long this has all been planned. 15 years, according to my sources. 15 years of watching, waiting, studying, preparing. That's quite an investment of time and energy." Chloe's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. How could Candy possibly know about that? "Derek's been very helpful," Candy said, as if reading her thoughts. "Amazing what a man will tell you when he's tired of being married to a sociopath." The word hit like a lightning strike. Chloe actually recoiled, her face a mask of shock and terror. "That's not true," she gasped. "Isn't it?" Candy asked, pulling a photograph from the folder. "Then how do you explain this?" The photo showed Chloe's home office, walls covered with pictures of Candy and Morgan, newspaper clippings, even what looked like a timeline of their relationship with notes in Chloe's handwriting. Or this. Another photo, showing financial records that detailed Chloe's theft from her clients. Or this. A medical report that revealed the extent of Chloe's psychological problems. With each revelation, Chloe seemed to shrink further into herself, like a flower wilting in real time. Morgan was staring at the photos with growing horror, finally seeing the woman he'd risked everything for in her true light. "You're insane," he whispered, and it wasn't clear if he was talking to Chloe or Candy. "That's what the psychiatric evaluation concluded," Candy agreed pleasantly. "Borderline personality disorder with obsessive tendencies and a history of stalking behavior. Fascinating reading, really." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating their faces in stark black and white. In that moment, Chloe looked like a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. "You can't prove any of this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Can't I?" Candy asked. "Derek's already spoken to the authorities." Amazing how cooperative he became once he realized he could disappear while his wife faced the consequences of her actions. "Derek wouldn't," Chloe began, then stopped as the full implications hit her. "Oh, but he would," Candy said softly. "He's been planning his escape for months. New identity, offshore accounts, the works. By now, he's probably halfway to a country that doesn't have extradition treaties with the United States." Chloe's world was crumbling in real time, and Candy was orchestrating the destruction with surgical precision. "The best part," Candy continued, "is that this house is equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. Every conversation, every moment of intimacy, every whispered betrayal, it's all been recorded. The police will have quite a comprehensive picture of what's been happening here." Morgan finally found his voice. "You've been recording us?" "I've been protecting myself," Candy corrected, "from people who apparently have been planning to destroy my life for over a decade." The rain was coming down in sheets now, and lightning was flashing almost continuously. The storm had arrived with the fury of nature unleashed, matching the tempest that was tearing apart everything they thought they knew about each other. "What do you want?" Chloe asked, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Candy's smile was beautiful and terrible. "Justice, truth, the complete and total destruction of everyone who betrayed me." She stood up, her silk dress whipping in the wind, looking like an avenging angel silhouetted against the storm. "But first," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around them, "I want you both to understand exactly what you've lost, what you threw away, what you'll never have again." As if summoned by her words, a pair of headlights appeared through the rain, growing brighter as they approached the house. "Right on time," Candy murmured, checking her watch with satisfaction. "Who is that?" Morgan asked, his voice tight with fresh panic. Candy's smile was radiant and terrifying. "The final guest at our little party. I thought we needed a witness for what comes next." The car doors slammed in the distance, and footsteps could be heard approaching through the rain. Both Morgan and Chloe were staring at the approaching figure with the expression of condemned prisoners seeing their executioner. "Ladies and gentlemen," Candy announced as the footsteps reached the deck stairs, "let the reckoning begin." Chapter 10. The Greatest Revenge. Checkmate. The footsteps that emerged from the storm belonged to Detective Sarah Chen of the New York Police Department, and she was carrying handcuffs. "Good evening, Mrs. Bruce," Detective Chen said as she climbed the deck stairs, rain streaming from her coat. "Thank you for calling this in." Morgan and Chloe turned to stare at Candy with expressions of absolute horror. She had planned this, all of it. Every moment of this weekend had been orchestrated to lead to this exact outcome. "My pleasure, Detective," Candy replied with devastating calm. "As I explained on the phone, I have extensive evidence of fraud, stalking, and theft. The suspects are right here." "You called the police," Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, my dear," Candy said with mock sympathy, "did you think this was just about adultery? This is about so much more than a pathetic affair." Detective Chen opened her badge wallet, water dripping from the leather. "Chloe Brooks, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and stalking. You have the right to remain silent." "Wait!" Chloe screamed, jumping to her feet. "You don't understand. She's lying. She's manipulating everything." "Am I?" Candy asked, producing a thick folder from seemingly nowhere. "Detective, these are financial records showing Mrs. Brooks has stolen over $2 million from her consulting clients over the past 3 years. There are also medical records confirming her history of obsessive behavior and documented evidence of a 15-year stalking campaign against me." Detective Chen took the folder, her experienced eyes quickly scanning the documents. "This is quite comprehensive, Mrs. Bruce." "I believe in being thorough," Candy replied. "There are also recorded conversations where Mrs. Brooks admits to planning my psychological destruction, photographs of her shrine to my personal life, and testimony from her husband confirming her criminal behavior." "Her husband?" Morgan asked weakly. "Derek Brooks," Detective Chen confirmed, consulting her notes. "He contacted us 3 days ago with evidence of his wife's illegal activities. He's cooperating fully with our investigation." Chloe's face went bone white. "Derek wouldn't. He couldn't. He provided quite a lot of information," Candy said conversationally. "Amazing how motivating the threat of prosecution can be. He was very eager to distance himself from your crimes." "This is insane," Chloe shrieked, but her voice was becoming hysterical. "I loved him. I loved Morgan. I never stole anything." Detective Chen was already reaching for her handcuffs. "Mrs. Brooks, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No!" Chloe backed toward the deck railing, her eyes wild with panic. "You don't understand. She's the crazy one. She recorded us. She planned this whole thing." "Actually," Detective Chen said calmly, "Mrs. Bruce was perfectly within her rights to record activities in her own home, especially given the stalking and theft you were committing." Candy watched Chloe's breakdown with the detached interest of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "The beauty of it is that everything you did was actually illegal, while everything I did was completely legal. I simply documented crimes and reported them to the proper authorities." Morgan finally found his voice. "What about me? What about our marriage?" Candy turned to her husband with eyes that held no warmth, no love, nothing but cold calculation. "What about it, Morgan? Did you think I would forgive you for betraying me with a criminal sociopath?" "I didn't know." "You didn't care to know," Candy corrected. "You were so desperate for attention that you didn't bother to question why my best friend was suddenly so interested in comforting you." Detective Chen had managed to get the handcuffs on Chloe, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. "The car is this way, Mrs. Brooks." "Wait!" Morgan called out. "What happens to me?" Detective Chen paused. "You haven't committed any crimes, Mr. Bruce. Adultery isn't illegal in New York. However, she glanced at Candy. "I believe your wife's divorce attorney will have some interesting things to discuss with you." "Divorce?" Morgan's voice was barely a whisper. Candy's smile was beautiful and terrible. "Did you think there was any other outcome? You betrayed me, Morgan. You chose her over me, over us, over everything we built together." "But I love you," Morgan said desperately. "I made a mistake, but I love you." "No," Candy said with devastating finality. "You loved the idea of me. You loved what I could give you. But when things got difficult, when I needed you most, you turned to the first woman who paid attention to you." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the 3 figures on the deck, like a tableau from a Greek tragedy. Detective Chen was already leading Chloe toward the stairs, the broken woman stumbling and sobbing as the rain soaked through her clothes. "This isn't over!" Chloe screamed over her shoulder. "I'll tell everyone the truth. I'll destroy you." "With what?" Candy asked pleasantly. "Your credibility is somewhat undermined by the felony charges and the psychiatric evaluation. Who's going to believe a convicted criminal and diagnosed sociopath?" As if in response to her words, more police cars appeared through the rain, their red and blue lights painting the storm in violent colors. Mrs. Brooks will be processed tonight, Detective Chen said to Candy. We'll need you to come in tomorrow to sign your statement. Of course, Candy replied. I'm always happy to cooperate with law enforcement. As the police cars drove away with Chloe in custody, Morgan and Candy stood alone on the deck, the storm raging around them like nature's fury unleashed. How long have you known? Morgan asked finally. Months, Candy replied. I suspected something was wrong even before I found proof. You were different, distant, guilty. Why didn't you confront me? Candy turned to face him fully, and Morgan saw in her eyes the woman who had built a $500 million empire through sheer force of will. Because I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal.